On Friday night, we came to the foot of the cross, and we came to where Jesus completes his baptism. He completes his full immersion into humanity. On Good Friday, we realize that Jesus, who was killed for being a God with too much humanity, the religious elite could not handle a God with the humanity of Jesus. Today on Easter, we come to the other side and we celebrate a Jesus who was brought to life for being a human with too much God. And the last we had seen Jesus, he had declared, "It is finished." And what we considered was that on the cross, it is finished. Whatever your picture of God was before Jesus, that's finished. And he breathed his last. It's from the death of Jesus that we're going to pick up the Gospel of John as it records the Easter story. I can think of nothing better than to walk through the Easter story this morning from the Gospel of John. I love John. And so we're going to begin at John 19, verse 38, and we're going to process a few highlights as we go along. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one, because of his fear of the Jews, he asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Here we meet Pharisee Joe. Not much is known for sure about Joe, other than the language of the Gospels presents him as a Pharisee, probably. And then he's connected to the town of Arimathea, hence Joe of Arimathea. He's a wealthy man and he's called good and righteous. But what we also find here is that he was a timid or a fearful follower of Jesus. He's one that we read back in Matthew would call a little faith. He's a little faith opposed to the great faiths of say, the centurion and others like him who Jesus says, "I haven't found greater faith than this." Joe comes on the scene because Jesus was ultimately killed by Rome for treason. And Pilate would have been unlikely to turn over the body of a treasonous man who called himself king. The last thing you want is the body of a dead man who claimed to be king being taken by his followers to be venerated and to continue to be followed. You're not going to turn over a body of a traitor like that. You're going to hold on to it. But Roman records show that those in Pilate's position, they didn't get wealthy simply off of government salaries. They were not opposed to being bribed. They were not opposed to getting the wheels greased a little bit to make things happen. This is why the Gospels let us know that Joe's a rich guy. He could get things done. And so while we're to understand that Joe was a fearful guy of the Jews, we see that Joe, he expected to survive going to Pilate and asking for the body of a traitor to Rome. If Pilate was a stand-up guy to Rome, Joe would be the next one on the cross. You want to take a traitor and care for the body. But despite being a fearful person, Joe knows he's not in too much danger from Pilate because Joe knows how things work. Money gets things done in this town. And so little faith Joe, he asked for permission to claim the body of Jesus. And we read on. Pilate gave him permission. So he came and removed Jesus' body. Nicodemus, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. So Joe pays the bribe, and Pilate releases the body. And there's someone else with Joe. It's Nick. It's another Pharisee. And John wants us to know who Nick is. Nick is also a little faith. John's gospel painted Nick through the gospel as one who's a bit timid and fearful. And he's a bit confused about what to make of Jesus. And even when he first comes to Jesus, he comes at night. He sneaks over to Jesus, and Joe and Nick have tended to hang back in fear and uncertainty, it seems. But what we find as Jesus' most loyal followers have mostly abandoned him as he went to the cross. The little faiths come out of the woodwork and they begin to step up. And it's not just any little faiths, it's Pharisees. It would be expected as Jesus begins his ministry that the religious experts would recognize their God coming. They expected a Messiah figure. They expected something like this to happen. But they didn't recognize Jesus for who they were supposed to see him for what he was. And the theme begins that Jesus' followers collect from the most unlikely. Fishermen, tax collectors, and all sorts of average people. The ones who were not the religious elite. Over time, though, it's now the religious elite who become the most unlikely to follow Jesus when they were first expected to follow him. Keeping in step with finding his followers among the most unlikely, it's a pair of little faith Pharisees who are highlighted as the ones who come to tend to the body of Jesus. They do this when others have deserted him. So we read on. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a new tomb, which no one had ever been laid. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. It's the gangster story that plays out in every mafia movie. We've suddenly got a body to deal with. And we've prepared the body according to the mafia custom. Usually you roll it up in a rug. But now, where do we put this thing? Well, Joe and Nick, they have a body to deal with. They prepared it according to the Jewish custom. And conveniently for them, John writes, would you look at that? There's a perfectly good, brand new tomb that nobody's bothering to use. We'll use it. This means we don't have to drive through town with a body in the trunk of our chariot and worry about getting pulled over by a Roman and having to bribe someone else. So the body's stashed. And we read on. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. It's still night when Mary goes out. Night is when Zach had come to Jesus. Nighttime in the Gospel of John is a sign of confusion, a sign of a lack of answers or a lack of understanding. Zach comes to Jesus with questions. Others come to Jesus at night when they need information, they need to gain understanding. When understanding comes, when people understand things, when people have the answers, John relates it's daytime. So John wants us to know that Mary's going to the tomb while it's dark. There is still a time of confusion and a lack of understanding among Jesus' followers about what has happened. They are still in the dark. So in other words, John is saying that while all of Jesus' followers are in a post-crucifixion haze of confusion, it's a woman who acts as the men continue to sit. So we read on, and keep in mind that John refers to himself in his gospel as the other disciple. So when you read the other disciple in the gospel, this is John. So she ran and went to Peter and John, the one whom Jesus loved. When you're writing your own book, you get to say how much Jesus loved you. So she ran and went to Peter and John, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and John set out and went towards the tomb. The two were running together, but John, the one writing this, John, outran Peter, and I reached the tomb first. I bent down and looked in, and I saw the linen wrappings laying there, but I did not go in. Then Peter came from behind. He lost. Peter came following me, and he went into the tomb. Peter saw the linen wrappings laying there and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Mary has sought an answer. She has been in a state of confusion, wondering what has happened, what has gone on. My hope has died. And she heads to the cross, perhaps getting up, perhaps wanting to walk and think, to go stand outside the tomb where the body of hope still laid dead. And she finds another question. What now has happened to the tomb? The question deepens when John brags that he beat Peter to the tomb and he saw wrappings that had been placed on Jesus' body. The questions deepen even further when Peter now outdoes John and goes further into the tomb. Not only does he see what John saw, but he also sees the face cloth of Jesus that would have been used in burial. And it's kind of off by itself. Much has been made about the face cloth of Jesus and what does this face cloth mean? It may not mean anything. It is interesting to me that the word used for face cloth here is a Greek word, which is also known as essentially a sweat towel. In our modern world, it's most synonymous with a handkerchief. And its everyday usage was that during one's life, you carried these around and you wiped the sweat off your face. You would use them when you were laboring. You're in the desert, you're in the heat, and you're going to sweat. So this is used to wipe sweat, but in death, the size of the cloths that were about the size of a handkerchief, they're also about the right size that was needed to cover a dead person's face. So they're synonymous. A sweat cloth, but also a cloth that conveniently was face-sized. I consider that if we are to make something of the cloth being set aside by itself, possibly folded, possibly, they can even say twisted or wrung out. If we make something of the cloth, it's that the risen Jesus is signifying that he no longer needs a sweat cloth. The sweat of his earthly ministry has been completed when he said it's finished on the cross. And he no longer needs his handkerchief. So he folds it up nicely and sets it aside. It's a cool picture and all, but we don't know. And I also like to consider that there's a much more petty reason that this cloth is mentioned. And it relates to an ongoing and not always friendly competition between Peter and John. So let's read on. Then John, that's me, the one who reached the tomb first. I also went in, and I saw and believed. For as yet, they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. John points out that up to this point, the disciples, they have not yet seen the truth that Jesus has to rise from the dead. But John says that in this moment, it came to me once I went all the way in the tomb with Peter and I saw it empty. John essentially says we were racing and I won. Not only did I get there first, but I looked into the tomb first. And I saw the linens that Jesus had been wrapped in. But then he gives credit to Peter. But then Peter pushed right past me and he went straight in the tomb. The guy's a little irreverent. But not only did he go into the tomb first and see what I saw, he got to see something new before me. He saw the face cloth. So the cloth is mentioned to show how there's a competition. Peter one-ups John. I saw something before you saw it. But John continues. Well, I went in after Peter, and I saw then what he saw. But I saw more. I then saw the truth that Jesus had been trying to tell us all along. But we had not yet grasped it. I saw that Jesus needed to die and rise from the dead. His words came back to me as I fully took in the empty tomb. I saw the ultimate and final truth before Peter. And there's nothing more that he can see that can trump what I saw. I won. And so John's proud of himself in this competition. The competition reaches a peak in this moment. It's a race to the tomb. It's who saw what first and who saw the most. And John lays out that he won the competition. So we read on. Then the disciples return to their homes. Peter and John, they go home. It doesn't appear that John actually cared to share his revelation with Peter or Mary, who was at the tomb as well. If John is this competitive, perhaps he is holding on to what he has now seen as the truth in order to use it at the right time. We can see these people becoming very human in this place of John where he makes it competitive. He opposes himself to Peter and they're competing. So Peter and John go back to their respective houses, but as we continue reading, John has not at least filled in Mary so she can connect the dots of what's going on. So she stays behind at the tomb. As we go to take a closer look at Mary, we'll go ahead and bring the kids back here in a second. And if you're going to be baptized and you need to change, go ahead and head out and change. And we're going to wrap the story up by looking at Mary on Easter Day. We'll keep on reading. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you've carried him away." I guess she's thinking we borrowed a tomb that wasn't necessarily ours, but it was convenient. And so maybe the gardener helped, somebody came by, I'm going to need that in a couple days, I think. And we got to get Jesus out of here. So she's like, if you helped move him, where did you move him? Tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away. She wants to care for the body again. Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, it's teacher. It's rabbi. Jesus said to her, "Do not touch me, because I have not yet ascended to my Father." We're going to pause for a moment here since many people wonder what to make of Jesus telling Mary not to touch him. I agree with the commentators who don't try to read too much into this, and they keep it simpler. I agree with the commentaries, one in particular, that interprets the literal reading of the Greek here as, "Stop touching me. Mary, stop touching me." And what is envisioned is a Jesus who is still on a mission. He has things to do still. He has to ascend to his Father. He still has things that he's meant to do. And Mary has thrown herself at him and she's holding on to him and she wants to spend time reconnecting now. Tell me everything, Jesus. What's happened? Tell me all of this. And she's holding on to him. And Jesus essentially tells her, Mary, okay, you have to let me go for a second. I've still got things to do. And I have something for you to do. If you want to stick with this common English translation, it still makes sense that Jesus probably sees what Mary wants to do. She wants to throw herself at him, to wrap her arms around and to connect with the hope that she thought was dead. And before that even happens, as Jesus sees her going for it, Jesus is like, hold on, Mary, hold on. Don't grab me right now because I still have things I need to do. And I have something that I need you to do. So we don't have time to just sit and reminisce and reconnect right now. There's still work to be done. So Jesus has work for Mary to do. And we keep reading. He says, don't hold on to me, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. So Mary Magdalene went, and she announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord. And she told them that he had said these things to her. Jesus tasks Mary with the most important message of Easter, the resurrection. Greater than John thinking that he had won by seeing the truth of the resurrected God, Mary wins by seeing the resurrected God. Mary sees Jesus first. And so as John paints the competition with Peter, and you see them vying for who won this competition, it's interesting that John then writes and admits, we both left, and Mary saw more than either of us did. She saw Jesus before any of us. So by the direction of Jesus, Mary becomes the first female apostle. The word apostle simply means essentially one who is sent, and particularly to the first apostles of the era of Jesus, you had to have been directly sent by Jesus to carry a message for him. You had to have received the direction from Jesus himself. There were certain requirements that were particular to the 12 apostles. These are the ones with a direct assignment from God to carry the good news of his resurrection and everything else that they had seen, carry it to the Jews, primarily. Paul becomes an apostle to the Gentiles. He is recognized as an apostle with his claim that Jesus also comes to him and gives him the assignment to be an apostle, to carry a message. That's what the word apostle means again. And then we have Mary. Mary becomes an apostle because she too is directly commissioned by Jesus to carry the message of resurrection. She is commissioned by Jesus to carry the message of resurrection to male disciples, primarily 12 male apostles. 11 at this time, but they'll do 12, but it's a circle of 12. It has to be healed later on as they elect a 12th. So Mary carries the good news of the resurrection to the apostles. And the first Easter Sunday took place with Jesus' news, the good news of resurrection, being preached by a woman, Mary Magdalene, who has since become known as the apostle to the apostles, because she was commissioned by Jesus to carry his message to even the 11 remaining apostles. So now we gather to remember the good news that Mary carried. As the first woman apostle, she carried the message of resurrection, death conquered by life. And we're invited to bring our spirits to the waters of baptism. In his baptism, Jesus, he dove into the deep end of our waters, from life leading to death, as deep as you can go in humanity. And he then flipped baptism on its head, so that we now get to dive into the deep end of his waters in our life and in the act of baptism. Waters now not of human life leading to human death, but where it now overlaps in death, which is divine death, leading to this mystical, supernatural, divine life. So we begin to worship. We're going to start to worship our amazing God, who I found none like him. We talked recently about communion, where in many other religions, we have to set the table for a God and pray that he accepts what we've set for him. Christianity claims that our God has set the table for us, and there's spots aplenty at his table. We have an amazing God who says, I'm not distant from you. I'll come in the flesh. It's the only way that I, who am life itself, it's the only way that I can overlap into your death, into your experience of death, and meet you there to make it not a dead end, but an intersection where the road continues. It's an amazing God. So we're going to worship, and then here in a little bit after our first song, we'll also start baptisms.
Lord, I bring everything and nothing less, my best, my all. You deserve my every breath, my life, oh my song. I surrender all. Knowing I surrender all. Lord, take control. I trust in you. I'm letting go, for to give you everything and nothing less, my best, my all. You deserve my every breath, my life, oh, my song. Oh, and I surrender, and I surrender all. Jesus, I surrender all. Everything and nothing less, and I give you everything and nothing less. Yeah.